Most React developers write JSX every day, but very few ever see what it becomes before React uses it. In this lesson, we'll trace the complete path from JSX source code to the element tree that React uses as its blueprint for rendering. We have a simple React application. The app component returns a heading and a profile card component. At first glance, this looks like HTML mixed with JavaScript. But there's an important detail. JSX is not valid JavaScript syntax. Browsers and JavaScript engines cannot execute angle brackets, component tags, or JSX attributes directly. Before this code can run, it must be transformed. If we try to run this JSX directly in a JavaScript engine, we get a syntax error. The engine encounters a less than sign where it expects a normal JavaScript expression and immediately fails. That's why every React application includes a build step. Tools like Babel, SWC, ESBuild, or the TypeScript compiler convert JSX into ordinary JavaScript before the browser ever sees it. Without this transformation, React applications wouldn't run at all. Modern React uses the automatic JSX runtime introduced in React 17. During compilation, each JSX tag is transformed into a function call. An HTML element, like an H1, becomes a call to JSX, while a component like profile card also becomes a JSX call, but with the component function itself passed as the type. Notice the difference. For HTML elements, the type is a string, such as H1 or div. For React components, the type is the actual function reference. This distinction is how React knows whether it should create a DOM node or execute a component function. The JSX function doesn't create DOM nodes. Instead, it returns a plain JavaScript object called a React element. Every React element has 4 fields: type, props, key, and ref. The props object contains all attributes, including children. The key field helps React track identity during updates, and ref provides a reference slot when needed. The important thing to remember is that a React element is just data. It's not a DOM node, and it contains no behavior. When JSX contains children, the compiled output becomes nested function calls. The child elements are created first, producing their own element objects. Those objects are then placed into the parent's children prop. In our example, the H1 element and the profile card element become entries inside the main element's children array. The structure of the JSX directly determines the structure of the resulting element hierarchy. Once all the nested JSX function calls finish executing, the result is a tree of React elements. At the top is the main element. Inside it are 2 child elements, the H1 and the profile card. Each node in the tree is simply another React element object containing its own type, props, key, and ref. This entire structure is known as the element tree. It represents what the UI should look like, but it is still only data. React elements are intentionally lightweight. Let's first look at what an element actually contains. An element only stores 4 pieces of information: type, props, key, ref. That's the complete shape of a React element. Now switch to the what's not in an element view. Notice what's missing. There is no state. There are no methods. There are no DOM references. There are no lifecycle hooks. Even event listeners are simply stored as props until React later attaches them to real DOM nodes. An element is nothing more than a frozen snapshot describing what should appear on screen. Whenever a component render, React creates a fresh element tree and compares it against the previous one to determine what changed. Many React beginners use these terms interchangeably, but React actually works with 3 distinct abstractions. Let's look at them one at a time. Element. An element is a plain JavaScript object. It contains fields like type, props, key, and ref. Elements describe what should appear on screen, but they contain no behavior and no DOM functionality. They are lightweight pieces of data produced by the JSX function. Component. A component is completely different. A component is simply a function. It accepts props and returns React elements. Think of it as a factory that produces element trees. React decides when to call the function and uses the returned elements as the next UI description. Components create elements. They are not elements themselves. DOM node. Finally, we have DOM nodes. These are actual browser objects, such as HTML elements. They exist inside the document, can receive events, expose methods, and have computed styles. Unlike elements, DOM nodes are expensive to create and update. React uses the element tree as an intermediary, so it can determine the minimum DOM changes required. DOM nodes are the final output users actually see on screen. Now we can connect all three layers together. A component function runs and returns JSX. The JSX compiler transforms that JSX into _JSX parens calls. Those calls produce React element objects. The resulting element tree becomes React's blueprint for the UI. React then reads that blueprint and creates or updates the actual DOM nodes in the browser. Everything flows in a single direction: component to element tree to DOM nodes. Components create descriptions. Elements store descriptions. DOM nodes display the result. Understanding this separation is one of the biggest steps toward understanding how React really works under the hood. If this helped you finally see what React is doing behind the JSX syntax, you're only scratching the surface. Runtime Visuals includes dozens of interactive simulations that make React's internals visible and intuitive. Explore the full course at runtimevisuals.com and learn React by watching every abstraction come to life.